So this evening we continue the program that we started last night, the Yogic Path of Right Livelihood, with Urmila Devi Dasi. So we'll introduce her again for those who just arrived. Urmila Devi Dasi has been practicing Bhakti Yoga and meditation since 1973 and teaches internationally. She earned her Doctor of Education from the University of North Carolina and has been a professor in sociology and education at Bhaktivedanta College in Belgium. Urmila has authored many books and dozens of articles. Her upcoming book is with Rukmini Devi Dasi, Dr. Ruchira Datta. And we had a very wonderful talk last night and a workshop today, 2 workshops in the midday. So now we're going to have the second talk. Let us give a warm welcome to Urmila Devi Dasi.
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharni Nipase Susundrani Paskatya Desatanani Mandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Cha Anchakapachubhyascha Kipasindavye Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So last night we talked about 6 different ways to have a prosperous life and connecting that to our livelihood, to find out what is our nature, what are the ways in which we can feel fulfilled and rich, and to have a livelihood that would provide us with those. During our workshops, we looked at a very different model. We looked at the model of the 4 fields of work as explained in Bhagavad Gita. So tonight I want to continue what we were talking about last night, but not just what is it that makes us feel wealthy and prosperous, but how we can cherish our sources of wealth. And this is a way not only of connecting our nature with our means of sustenance, but also connecting our enjoyment of prosperity to the divine. It's a key aspect of spiritualizing our livelihood. And as we mentioned yesterday, it's very common that people want to lead a spiritual life, but as you were speaking about, when they're overcome by this and that in the world, their sadhana falls away. They say, all right, well, I'm going to spend, an hour meditating every day, and it becomes 1 minute or 5 minutes or 0 minutes. Right? And we may just look at that portion of our life, but without looking holistically at how we're living. We may not be able to isolate the sources of our difficulty with following sadhana. In addition to that, we really don't want to have a fractured life. We don't want to have, well, I spend this much time in worship and connection, and this much time in career that has nothing to do with that, and this much time in family, and this much time in entertainment, and they're all disconnected. We want to have a holistic life. If we understand that sarva kalamidam brahma, everything is spiritual, then everything we do should be able to be connected with the divine. So first, we're just going to look in a very general way about cherishing our sources of wealth, and then we're going to return to the model of the 6 kinds of prosperity that comes from the Vedas, and look very briefly at how we can cherish each of those in our career. So in a general way, whatever prosperity we have, in whatever category we have, it's a gift from the universe, it's a gift from the divine. We can't create any kind of prosperity out of nothing. It doesn't really belong to us. It's all a gift to us. And if we think about things deeply, we'll see that as something being given to us, at least on the external platform, it's also something that can be taken away, isn't it? Isn't that a fact? And it can be taken away very quickly. You know, some illness, some accident, some change in the world situation. And in a moment, everything that we're enjoying as prosperity can be lost. I mean, we talked about how losing the prosperity of Vairagya is a little harder. But still, things are very tottering. And therefore, we should see that they're gifts. It's not exactly something that I deserve and I create and, you know, I have it and I'm entitled to it and it's mine. So starting with this view that things are a gift is the beginning of our cherishing, of our prosperity. It means, how do I really value this? Now, there's very many stories in the world about what happens to people who don't value what they have. There's the famous fable of the goose that laid the golden egg, right? You all know that story? When the guy thought, okay, well, I don't want to feed the goose. I just want to get the golden eggs. So he chopped off the head of the goose. But, you know, that's often what we do with our sources of wealth. It's very common in the modern day and age that people are trying to get prosperity. They're trying to get wealth. And yet they're destroying and polluting and damaging the very thing that's giving them wealth. They're cutting off the limb of the tree that sustains them. Now, our basic philosophical foundation for cherishing our sources of wealth is to understand the difference between reality and illusion. In one sense, we say, as I just said, Sarva Kalamidam Brahma. Everything is spiritual. Everything is Brahman. There really isn't anything that's disconnected from reality and from truth. But yet, there is an energy of truth that allows us to see things as disconnected. This energy is explained very nicely in the Chaturshloki of the Bhagavat Purana. The translation is, whatever appears to be of value, if it is without relation to me, Krishna speaking, Vishnu speaking, know it to be without reality. It is my illusory energy, that reflection that appears to be in darkness. A reflection of something, you could say a reflection is real, but it's not the reality. And if you try to smell a reflection of a flower, what do you get? Nothing. Trying to enjoy prosperity in the mood of a reflection does not give us satisfaction. So I had a personal experience like this. So there was a day I was fasting from all food and water for the day, and I was feeling a little tired, so I took a little rest. And in my dream, I was eating a very big feast. And I was also very thirsty in my dream. So I was drinking a cup of water, a whole cup of water, and then I poured again, and I was drinking in my dream another cup of water, and I poured again, and I was drinking in my dream another cup and another cup. And finally, in my dream, I took a whole gallon jug of water and I was pouring it in my mouth. And then in my dream, I thought, something's really funny here. Why am I still thirsty? And then when I woke up, I realized, oh, it was dream water. When we try to enjoy things separately from the divine, we're trying to enjoy dream water. There is no such thing as separate from the divine. It's not possible. But when we have that mood of trying to enjoy separately from the divine, we don't really enjoy. And such is the cause of people amassing prosperity in one or more of those 6 areas and then saying, is that it? Is that all there is? They get the beauty, they get the strength, they get the knowledge, maybe even they have the detachment. But if it's without connection, without a consciousness of connection with the divine, they say, is that it? I was working so hard for that, and that was all it is? Because there's no substance to it. It's just dream water. It's just a reflection. So the main key to cherishing our prosperity, to cherishing our sources of wealth, is to make sure that in our awareness, in our consciousness, in our behavior, in our speech, in our emotions, we're constantly seeing the connection with the divine. And because everything is connected with the divine, because everything is divine, Maya tatamidam sarvam jagadavyaktimurtina matsani sarvabhutani nachaham te suvasitaha, because everything is part of the divine. It's simply a question of turning our consciousness. And it may seem like a very big job to do that, but because it is the reality, because we are spirit and everything is also spiritual, it doesn't really take a lot of work. If you think about 2 parallel lines, if one moves just a fraction of a millimeter, it's going to go in another direction. And turning one's consciousness just the tiniest bit, one starts to perceive all of our sources of prosperity as coming from the divine, connected with the divine, and bringing us closer into love. So we're going to look just at general types of prosperity, general sources of wealth, and then we're going to look at the 6 that we did last night. So first, there's the body and the mind. Whatever sort of richness and prosperity we enjoy in this world is coming through the body and the mind. Well, that means to take care of it, to keep our mental health, our physical health. But this also means to do things that bring us joy. How much time do we spend doing things that bring us joy? There's a lot of research into people who have chronic diseases, chronic pain, and a lot of the research shows that people with chronic pain and chronic diseases tend to just work at things they don't like and not take any time to do things that are just playful and joyful. Now, I like the description in the prayers you have of Krishna as the playful and joyful manifestation of Bhagavan. And really, all of life is meant for this. The Sanskrit words for this are lila and krida. We are meant to have, to enjoy a life in a very playful spirit. The concept of doing hard work comes from seeing things in terms of the reflection. And there is so many wonderful ways to have a joyful, playful life in spirituality. And just like kirtan is very joyful and very playful. Then caring for those who work under us. If our career involves having people who are our employees or our subordinates in some way, are we kind? Are we merciful? Are we compassionate? Do we cultivate some friendship with them? There's some fascinating verses in the Bhagavat Purana. One particularly in the 4th canto of Narada Muni speaking to Prince Dhruva, where he says something that I find completely astonishing. He says, if you want to be free of all miseries of life, now that doesn't mean you never break your arm. It just means that one doesn't experience the miseries of life as miseries. He says, if one wants to get free of all the miseries of life, when you see somebody who's superior to you in something, you should feel joy. Someone who's more spiritually advanced, someone who's more materially beautiful or more knowledgeable or anything. Oh, what fortune this person has. Someone who's one's equal, one makes friends with them, and someone who's not as fortunate, you uplift them. In materialistic life, when we see someone who's more fortunate than us, we try to criticize them. A lot of the news is just full of that criticism of fortunate people, isn't it a fact? Right? When we find someone who's equal, we brag to try to make ourselves look better, and someone who's less fortunate, we exploit them. Isn't this how the world goes among materialistic people? Exploit someone who's lower than you. I mean, you can give them some charity, but not enough to make them equal to you. Someone who's your friend, you try to put yourself above them, and someone who's higher than you, try to tear them down. Now, why is it that doing this relieves us of all misery? Because it relieves us of all envy. It brings us to a platform of understanding that this genuine spiritual equality, Vijay Vinaya Sampane Brahmani Gavi Hasani Suni Chaiva Supaketa Pandita Samadarshina, we see that everyone has equal worth. Everyone is equally spiritual. Then caring for the planet, for the air, the water, and the land. This is a lot more difficult than it sounds, especially in our career. You know, many of us are involved in sources of our livelihood that are not really very friendly to the environment. It's very difficult to find a career that's totally environmentally friendly. I mean, there's so many indirect ways in which we're doing things that harm other people or animals or the air or the land or the sky. But as far as possible, to have a way of maintaining ourselves that also is good for our total environment, to cherish our total source of wealth. So looking at the body and mind, keeping our body and mind healthy, going out of our way to do things that fill us with joy, treating others with respect and spiritual equality, and taking care of the planet are all ways that we cherish our sources of wealth, and ways that when we do that, we can remember that everything is divine. So now I want to go specifically to the 6 forms of prosperity that we talked about last night. And for those of you who weren't here, we'll just review them very briefly. So we looked at Aishvarya, which is related to the Sanskrit word Ishwara, which means controller. So this is when one's feeling of prosperity and wealth in life come from having organizational leadership, money, luxury. When one is leading others, when one is able to have some control over the environment. Now, if, I think some people think of it very pejoratively, but if there aren't good organizational leaders, the world collapses. And so if there aren't people who enjoy having organizational leadership facility, then there won't be able to be people who take that responsibility. There's a wealth of gyan, which is knowledge and wisdom, enjoying learning things, collecting knowledge, curiosity. Virya, which is strength, physical strength, mental strength, power, health. Any of the healing professions are involved in virya, practically any sports, dance, anything that requires great mental focus and concentration. Shri is beauty. So this would mean one's own physical beauty, gracefulness, a career that also deals with beauty in the arts, in music, in performances, and also the beauty of splendid, charismatic leadership. Shri literally means splendor. So someone who's a leader, not so much because organizational ability, but because of charisma. Yasha is fame. As we mentioned, Yasha is a personality who is a child of Kirti and Dharma. And Kirti is related to the word kirtan. It means to talk about, to glorify. But many times people are glorified for nothing. But Kirti mixed with Dharma, if you're glorified for being meritorious, then you get Yasha. So this is when people respect us because we're actually worthy of respect. And Yasha very much has the prosperity of community, friendship, family. And Vairagya is the strangest of the types of prosperity. It is the wealth of freedom and equanimity, the wealth of renunciation. You could say the wealth of simplicity, the wealth of no wealth, the wealth felt by people who take vows of poverty and find that such enriches their lives, or the wealth of people who don't have a lot of possessions or who don't have attachment to a home. Now, as we go through each of these 6, I'd like you to think about I hope you thought about from yesterday what you love and what kinds of richness in your own life are important to you, what you have presently in your career in terms of your preferred type of prosperity, and what you could do to increase what you don't have. But now for each of these, we're going to look at how do we cherish them? How do we value them? So as we go through each one, if each of us could just take a moment and think about, in what way am I not cherishing this? In what way am I just taking the golden egg and not feeding the goose? Am I not really understanding that this is divine? In what way am I cherishing it? In what way am I really taking care of this source of my wealth and nourishing it? And how would I like to improve? So this time we're going to look first at Virya, which again means anything to do with strength, strength of body, strength of mind, and health. So how do we cherish Virya? By doing things that are healthy, by eating healthy food. I'm sure many of you here already do that, but how many people in the world eat food that's not food? Yeah. I remember when my oldest son was 8, we passed an advertisement for Diet Coke that said, just for the taste of it. And he said, yes, Mommy, that's not food. It's just the taste, right? So people are eating food. Sometimes, I stay at various people's homes as I travel. And sometimes I stay at people's homes where there's no real food in the house at all. Everything there is full of chemicals and preservatives. And one of my sons worked in the natural food industry for a while, and he said, even a lot of the natural foods, it's been in storage for 6 to 12 months before it's on the shelf. So, a lot of what people are eating is something that, if that bread is still soft, like if you make your own bread, right? And if you've made your own bread, and especially once you slice that bread, how long is the bread going to stay soft? Once you've baked it, once you've sliced it, but you can go out and buy sliced bread and keep it in your cupboard for a week, 2 weeks, and it's still soft. So what is it? Is it actually food? So if we're going to be cherishing virya, if we're going to be cherishing health, we should eat real food. Preferably, it's food that we grow ourselves or that we get from someone who's grown it locally. We were so blessed today where there's a chiku tree growing right by the water, and one of the chikus had fallen down. That's a kind of brown fruit. It's very juicy, and we had the chiku fruit for our dinner. And this, according to Ayurveda, that's a rasayana. Rasayana means something that's immediately transformed into health and vitality in the body. When you eat something that's locally, organically grown, tree ripened, and you just take it and eat it, right? Not something that's flown from the other side of the world, picked unripe and ripened with gases and things of that nature. Again, we may not be able to do this entirely, but as far as possible, cherishing our health and our strength means to eat food that's real food. And of course, I'm very impressed to see here that the food is also offered to Bhagavan. That it's not just that it's healthy, but it's also spiritualized. What about healthy fabric? So I think I mentioned yesterday that I used to shop for people in India, and I sometimes traveled to various places and find where some of the old crafts were still in use, where people were, at one place I go to in Bengal frequently, where still in every home you see people weaving, and they're growing the cotton locally, they're dyeing it with natural dyes, they're weaving it themselves, and they have some amazing crafts, one which is the ikat, or sometimes called ikat, where they dye the threads before weaving. And then they weave them in such a way that the way they've dyed them, the threads come together and make a pattern. Generally when we get clothes with a pattern, it's some kind of stamp, right, after it's woven. But the pattern shows up in the weaving, and sometimes it's a double ikat, where they've dyed both the warp and the weft, and then weave it together. So cherishing health means also healthy fabrics, fabrics that are good for the earth, that are good for the people who produce them, that are good for the water when we wash them. Healthy medicines. A lot of good medicines. Obviously, many of us may owe our lives to the chemical medicine factories in so many ways. But as far as possible, to eat medicines that come from the earth, medicines that come from nature. What is Ayurveda? Medicine is food, and food is medicine. To be able, right? And also Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I am the healing herb. To find our medicines as they're meant to be grown. And if we have a livelihood where we're dealing with things like food and fabric and medicine, to deal with things that are really healthy for people, even if it's not going to be more profitable in the short run. We were talking earlier today in our workshop about the field of resources, and that those in the field of resources are interested in sustainability and things that are regenerative. So it's not really sustainable to have business that deals with health if that business is not producing things that are actually healthy for the planet and for people. Those who work in the field of government especially have to be careful of cherishing this virya or strength, because the government deals with virya in the form of the police force, the military. If one is involved in some career that deals with these things, one cherishes virya by not using the strength of arms and the strength of protection for illegitimate purposes. It doesn't misuse police and military force for protection and not for oppression. As Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, I am the strength of the strong, free of passion and desire. If one has a career as a professional athlete, or something where you're a dancer, an athlete, a performer, and you're using this virya in your career, then part of cherishing that is to make sure that you don't damage your body. Many people in these careers, they get injured, they just kind of wrap it up and go back out and damage their bodies further and further. Cherishing virya means that one takes care of the body if it's injured. It also means not artificially taking all kinds of chemicals to appear to be stronger than one naturally is, and therefore damaging the body. These are just some samples of ways in which we can cherish virya in our lives. If virya is one of the ways in which you feel prosperous and is related to your career, then if you can think for a minute, are there ways in which I'm not really cherishing health and strength and vitality in my own life and in my career? What are the ways in which I am cherishing it? And what's something I could do in the next week or 2 weeks to improve? Going on to Shri, which is beauty, splendor, charisma. So we might have personal beauty, and our personal beauty might be very integral to our career. There's a lot of research that shows that physically attractive people make more money, are more trusted. If there's a breakdown of a car on the side of the road and the person standing next to the broken down car is very physically attractive, more people are going to stop and help them. Same if they're taller, by the way. More physically attractive people are more likely to get hired. They're more likely to get paid more. They're more likely to be trusted. If physical beauty is part of our livelihood in our life, we cherish that beauty by not using our physical attractiveness to exploit others, not using it to incite lust and envy in others, not using it to try to secure something unfairly and to gain some sort of advantage over others. If beauty is part of our life and our career in terms of art and craft and artistry, then we cherish that beauty by honoring the real craft, not trying to cut corners in quality. A lot of what's going on in the world today by automation of craft is really destroying beauty in the world, isn't it? Yes. I remember when I first moved into the ashram, and my father came to visit, and he saw that on the altar were all real flowers. So, in India, that's very common. If there's a festival, you could have this entire building decked out with flowers. Right? But my father, and he was a very wealthy man, But when he came and he saw that our altar was covered with real flowers, he was just astonished. He said, "Are they all real?" Okay. So much of the so-called beauty in the world today, if our career involves producing beauty or selling beauty or somehow creating beauty, if that's part of our career, part of how we maintain ourselves, is false. It's imitation. It's made in a factory. People's craft and skills, their joy in the skills has been removed from them. A lot of the joy of enjoying the beauty is removed. Everything looks the same. You know, in nature, every leaf on every tree is different. Even on the same tree, every leaf is different. Right? There's such craftsmanship and artistry in nature. And if we are enjoying beauty, we should see that that is preserved. The old traditional crafts, the traditional skills, as far as possible. Because if we cut corners in order to make more cash, but then we lose the real prosperity of beauty, we end up being poor. So if we have a career that involves beauty, personal, physical beauty, creating beauty, sharing beauty, if we can think for a moment, are there ways in which I'm not cherishing the beauty in my livelihood, in my life? What are the ways in which I am cherishing it? And what could I do to improve? Turning to the prosperity of Aishvarya, organizational leadership, luxury. If we're drawn to this, having power, we should keep in mind that not all problems can be solved by power. Many years ago, when I was running a school, in the school we had all the students were required to learn public speaking. So I had one student who came, new student in the school, she was 13, and she said, "I don't want to do public speaking." And everybody in the class was we were all going to another place, we were all going to an event, it was kind of rushed, that was my excuse, I wanted to be efficient. And I just said, "Sorry, you have to do public speaking, it's part of the required curriculum." So what was I using? Power, right? And then she said, "No, I'm not going to." And I thought, oops. I said, "Well, then you can't be in the school because that's part of our program." She said, "Then I won't be in the school." I said, "Well, you'll have to talk to your parents about it." "Well, then I'll talk to my parents about that." And I thought, this is not working. If we have a position where we have some power over people, if that's part of our livelihood, it's part of our career, it's part of our life, one way we cherish it is by remembering that not everything can be accomplished with power. What I had to do was step back, talk to her, and negotiate. We ended up negotiating that she could give speeches just to me for a few weeks until she got the courage to speak in front of the class. But it was like an hour of negotiation, and had I not used power in the first place, I probably could have solved it in about a minute. So part of cherishing Aishvarya is remembering that there's other ways to get things done. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody was not cherishing their power over you and how that felt? So whenever we have power, to cherish other people like that. Sometimes connection, understanding, and negotiation, having a win-win solution, will go further. I remember a really interesting exercise that I did in the doctoral program. So our professor is talking to us about having win-win and negotiation and who's in favor of win-win. "Oh, I'm in everybody, I'm in favor of win-win. Of course I am." He said, "Very good. Now we're going to do an exercise." Now every class he did some exercise, and I don't know why we couldn't figure out what was going on. Every week he would fool us again. So he divided us up into groups. There were 3 tables. Each table had 2 teams of 3 people each. And we were trying to negotiate for what was going to be our school colors. So he had rigged it. Each of us had a list of colors that the other team couldn't see. He had rigged it so anything that would get 1 point for my team would get a negative point for the other team, and anything that would get 2 points for my team would get negative 2 points for the other team. But I couldn't see that. The only way we could get a win-win was for everybody to get 0. Well, of the 3 tables with 2 teams each, nobody negotiated for a 0-0. Everybody got a stalemate because everybody wanted to get at least 1 point. But if you got 1 point, the other team would get a negative 1 point. So nobody would agree. And when we looked at the cards and we saw that, I was like, wow, I don't really believe in win-win, do I? I really believe in win-lose. So cherishing any Aishvarya that we have also means a deep commitment to win-win and a deep commitment to negotiation. Another way we can cherish Aishvarya is to remember that if we have some position of power, power can be isolating. I know many people who are in positions of power, even in spiritual communities, and I find that over time, they tend to be in a kind of bubble where they lose touch with the people that they're guiding and that they're helping. They're starting to give advice that's not relevant to people's lived realities. In order to cherish Aishvarya, we need to connect with the people that we're guiding and we're leading, to really understand their lives so that we can help them, not just control them. Cherishing Aishvarya also means to be, as I know it's become a cliche, but a servant leader, someone who helps other people to also get autonomy in their life. We talked about Aishvarya also means wanting a sense of autonomy, to get other people in a position where they can get power and they can get autonomy and they can make decisions. Not just impressing people with our own power, but helping them to grow their own. So if we can think for a moment, if we enjoy the prosperity of Aishvarya in our life and in our career, are there ways in which we're not cherishing it? Are there ways in which we're cherishing it? And how could we improve? Going on to the prosperity of yasha, or community and fame. So many people enjoy having a community, a family, and society that gives them approval and respect, where they really feel like they belong somewhere, and that people really care about them and think that they're a good person. So cherishing this prosperity of yasha means not using our position of reputation, status, and high regard to have people show us deference even when we're wrong. I remember being in a meeting where the leader very clearly made a mistake. And afterwards I suggested maybe he should have apologized. And one of the other leaders said, oh, no, he shouldn't do that. That would take down his status. You know, if we insist that being respected means that we can never admit mistakes, we can never apologize, people have to agree with us even when we're wrong, then we're harming that very prosperity. Certainly, if we have fame and respect, that gives us a platform for doing good in the world. Many, many famous people are able to use that fame to be an example of doing good in the world. At the same time, again, like Aishvarya, it can put us in a kind of bubble where we're not really connecting with the people that we help. We almost become deafened to the needs and concerns of others. We can start feeling that we're genuinely above them. For people who work in the field of government, yasha can lead to a kind of nationalism and patriotism that excludes others or sees others as lesser. Now, there is a sense in which some idea of community and enthusiasm for one's community and loyalty can be enriching to everyone involved, yes? Some esprit de corps. But if it becomes used to exclude others, to put others down, to see others as lesser, then it's not cherishing that source of wealth. And sometimes it's a fine line between that sense of community and loyalty and cohesion. And where do we do that without seeing ourselves as special and better than others? Perhaps one of the most obvious ways of cherishing yasha is to have integrity. And again, this is distinguishing yasha from just kirti. People who are just famous without being famous for something meritorious, without being famous for dharma. We want to be sure that if we're respected because we're actually doing something good, not just because we've engineered ourselves into the headlines. So being honest, maintaining strict ethical and professional standards, keeping our commitments. I really like what you talked about the spiritual diary, and setting a resolve. And then if you find that what we're doing isn't equal to the resolve, saying, I think I have to have a more realistic resolve. Being careful to make commitments that we plan to keep. And then if something happens that we can't keep them, to be honest about it. But certainly not intentionally making commitments that we don't plan to keep. A very good motto is to underpromise and overdeliver. To underpromise and overdeliver. If you think you can get something done in 2 weeks, say you can get it done in 6. Then if you get it done in 3 weeks, everybody's happy. Does that make sense? Right? And I think we've all dealt with people who overpromise and underdeliver. I've dealt with some people where, okay, all right, your auntie's in the hospital. Okay, I get that. All right, your kid got sick. I got that. Okay, something special came up at work. I get this. But after 4 years go by, at one person it was 6 years. And after a while, you're wondering about all of these good and valid excuses why they don't come through with commitments. So if we're really going to cherish the respect that other people give us and the trust that other people give us, then we need to also be trustworthy. So if we can take a moment and meditate on, are there ways in which I'm not cherishing the respect and the trust and the status that I have in my life and in my career? What are the ways in which I am cherishing this prosperity of trust and fame and respect? And what could I do to improve? Now we're going to go to the prosperity of gyan, knowledge, and wisdom. One way we can cherish gyan is to remember that some of what we're sure that we know might be wrong. I remember once I was talking to my youngest son, I can't remember what it was about. And he said, "Mom, are you sure you're right?" I said, "Oh, I'm sure I'm right." And there was a long pause. He said, "Are you 100% sure?" And then I stopped and I said, "Well, maybe not." Right? None of us are absolute in our knowledge. Some of what I'm sure about, I might be wrong about. And as they say, we may not even know what we don't know, right? I may not even know to what extent or in what area I may be wrong. So to not be proud of our knowledge. It also means to love understanding, clarity, and insight for how they help ourselves and others. making sure my knowledge is used for beneficial ends. There's many people who work with knowledge and wisdom and use it for perverse means. They use their knowledge to cheat people, right? To present things in a way that's not quite honest, to make sure that I'm using my knowledge to further wisdom and insight in myself and in society. Another way that I cherish Gyan is to remember that however much knowledge I have in an area, a community of learned experts in my field is also valuable. In the area of spiritual knowledge, this is one reason why we have a Sangha, so that we can temper and adjust our own knowledge and wisdom by the knowledge and wisdom of the group. What I have seen over and over again is even people who are very learned and very wise and very realized, if they move away from the Sangha, if they just go off on their own, sometimes end up in a very strange place. Now, on the other hand, sometimes the consensus of what's true is wrong. Sometimes it's the outsider, the maverick, who says, hey, there's truth over here. What everybody believes is wrong. So sometimes cherishing Gyan is also to look at the outsider who says, hey, the emperor doesn't have any clothes on. What are you guys doing? So it means to honor the Sangha, the group of learned experts in our field, but also to honor the outsider and the maverick and to listen to their points of view. But for most of the time, we want to make sure that we're in community and we're using our knowledge wisely for benefit. So I'd like us again to meditate on if Gyan is a source of our prosperity. Are there ways in which we're not cherishing it? What are the ways in which we are cherishing it? And what could we do to improve? And then at our very mysterious item of prosperity, Vairagya. As we were saying yesterday, that raga means attachment, Vairagya means without, detachment. That the opulence of Vairagya generally involves freedom, equanimity, freedom often from possessions or residence, often freedom from the opinions of community. How we cherish Vairagya is to make sure that it's not dry. That it's engaged Vairagya. That we don't have pride. Oh, I am so much more detached from everyone else. People who enjoy Vairagya are often above kind of this striving and the pettiness of life. But it's easy to become proud of how one is above the striving and the pettiness of life. Also, there's many examples in the Shastra, in the Vedas, of people who were very accomplished in this opulence of Vairagya and had a buildup of fiery energy in their body that led to anger. There's many, many examples of great sages who ended up having Vairagya lead to anger and cursing of others. We don't have time to tell all those stories tonight, but those of you who are familiar, it's a common and repeated theme. Therefore, to cherish Vairagya means to temper it with empathy and compassion. It's very easy for those who love Vairagya to become stone-hearted because they're not so concerned about things in the world or other people's opinions or getting this and that, and they may become callous and uncaring. But Vairagya means that I can have compassion and empathy without an attachment to trying to use the other person for my own satisfaction, to uplift people for their own sake and not for my own pleasure. So if Vairagya is part of the way that we live and part of the way that we're wealthy, I'd like us to think about for a moment, are there ways in which we're not cherishing Vairagya? What are the ways in which we cherish it? And what could we do to improve? So in looking at any way in which we have these different kinds of prosperity in our life and in our livelihood, whatever of them we have, cherishing them involves always a feeling of humility. This prosperity is a gift. It's not something I can create. It's something that can be taken from me. It's part of the divine. Just always see that connection with the divine, not to try to enjoy it in a reflection. This means to have a constant feeling of humility and gratitude. There's a great relationship between humility and gratitude. So I always like to give this very simple example. Suppose you have $20 and you go to the store, you buy something and you find out it's only worth $5. How do you feel? You have $20, you go to the store, you buy something, and it's worth $20. How do you feel? You have $20, you go to the store, you buy something, you found out it was worth $100. How do you feel? Our enjoyment of something is directly proportionate, it's inversely proportionate to our feeling of humility and undeservedness. The more I feel a sense of entitlement, the less I enjoy anything. If you come home from work and you expect your spouse to have a 15-course meal ready for you, you're not going to enjoy it as much as if you feel that you're not entitled to it. Does this make sense to everybody? Yes? So this feeling of humility, which is a lack of a feeling of entitlement, is completely connected with a feeling of gratitude. The more we can be grateful in our life for the prosperity that we have, the more we see it as a divine gift bestowed upon us just out of love. The more we will always see that connection with the divine. And the more we will be cherishing our sources of wealth. One thing that we can think about is in what way my career brings me these different sources of prosperity, and how can I experience that in a mood of gratitude? You know, especially like if Gyan's just a part of my life, or Yasha's just a part of my life, or Aishwarya's just a part of my life, and it's been like that for weeks and months and years, it can kind of recede into the background. And we just start having a feeling of entitlement for it. I mean, those of you who live here, you may think that walking around in gardens full of flowers is just what everybody does. Yeah, well, everybody just sees crystal clear ocean waters and tropical flowers and has ripe chiku fruits fall out of the tree. And one may lose one's sense of gratitude for it. Whereas those of us who are just visiting are just, whoa, a ripe chiku fruit just fell out of the tree. But the same is true in each of our lives. Things just can sort of recede to the background, and we forget to see the divine in everything. So we have 3 or 4 minutes if anybody has any questions. Yes. Do we have a microphone?
Thank you for an awesome talk. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, Oh, thank you. And by the way, I've taught this before, but not in this format and this way. So any positive, negative, detailed feedback, whatever is appreciated. You can give it to me anywhere you see me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your talking about not everything can be accomplished with the power. So I was just trying to understand, how did you respond, that little girl, what did you think in your mind at that time when you knew, okay, I cannot resolve this with power, so I have to find some other way? I mean, how did you took that question? Or
well, I was in a time crunch at the time, so I couldn't resolve it at that particular moment. We were about to go to an event, and I just said, let's talk about it later. I mean, as soon as I could understand that when I was pushing with power, she was pushing back with power. And she had just as much as I did, just in another way. And then what I did is I just listened. What are your concerns?
So
I stopped dictating and just started listening. And I found out that her concerns was that she was scared. She hadn't had any training. She was afraid to get up and make a fool out of herself. And then I said, okay, well, let's negotiate. I said, it's a required class. It's not something I'm going to be able to waive for you, but I'd like to have you do it in a way where you feel comfortable. It took us about an hour of negotiation. And after that, I decided that it was probably best not to try to use power from the get-go, because I probably could have resolved it in 3 or 4 minutes had I just listened empathically from the beginning.
So did you use any kind of protocol after listening to her, after few minutes? How did you came up with, okay, I cannot resolve this with power, I have to use some negotiation?
Trying to find out what were her feelings. What emotions was she going through? What were her concerns? And was there a way, what could we get a win-win? Was there a way that I could keep the school rule and still take care of her needs and her concerns in a way that honored her? And we did come up with it. I mean, it took some back and forth. But what about this? No, that's not going to work. What about this? And also, I tried to express my needs and concerns. So instead of just, you have to do this because it's the rule and because I'm in charge, but this is the reason we have this policy, and this is how it's going to benefit you. So trying to become a little bit more vulnerable myself. I mean, it's tricky though, because once you pull out the power card, when you back up, you put yourself in a very difficult position. So better not to pull that out from the beginning. Don't threaten people with nuclear weapons in the first meeting. That was quite a lesson for me.
Thank you for sharing honest feedback. Appreciate you.
Sure. My pleasure. I think we have 1 minute. If anybody else has another question or comment. Yes, in the back.
Thank you. Thank you again for a wonderful talk. I have a 2-part question that kind of builds on itself. The first one is, if people are in a position to design their career, or they're building their career, going back to the world to do whatever they wanted to do you find that it's most effective for people to choose the 1 or 2 that really resonate with them and start the design of their career by focusing on fulfilling those 2 areas?
That should definitely be part of it. We also look in the workshops we're doing during the day, we also look at another model of career from the Vedas, and that is the 4 fields. So then we combine those, what would be the general fields in terms of the role within society, the dharma within society, and then what kind of prosperity do you want to get? Definitely you want to build from whatever type of prosperity is most meaningful for you, because if your career isn't nourishing you, you're not going to be happy, and you're not going to be able to fulfill your main function in society. And did you have one more question? And that will be it.
Yeah, and then from a holistic perspective, if we are feeling some sort of lack or unfulfillment, is it important that we do look at each of the areas and ensure that each area is getting at least some little bit of attention.
Perhaps for most of us, we have some areas that are not so important. For most of us, again, we would all like some of each of them. But for each of us, some are really like, it's okay if it's there, but if it's not there, it's not that big of a deal. So it's better to focus on those that are really crucial. And those of you who are coming to the workshops, tomorrow in the second workshop, we're going to be doing an exercise bringing together these 6 types of prosperity in the 4 fields, where we really hone in on what's most important to us. We're going to come up with the top 4 or 5 things that are just crucial for us in our livelihood. So we will go through that exercise. And I think it's being recorded, so if those of you have, I know a lot of you have other conflicting schedules, and so not everybody can go to everything. I'm not sure how long it's kept. How long is it kept on the Facebook page? Not very long. Oh, it's there. All right. So you can go there and check that out. Okay, thank you very much. Om Tat Sat.